Yeah, yeah. Interesting. You mentioned Roger Waters early on. Of course, he's re-recording "Dark Side of the Moon." In your opinion, does this have artistic merit, or is it just Waters bearing his buttocks to his former bandmates?
Well, I'm sure there's a bit of both, really, but I would certainly give Roger Waters the credit artistically to be doing it because he thought he was going to bring something new to what is already a well-attended and popular party that was, part of the great history of rock music. So I'm sure that he wouldn't be doing it only because of somehow getting back at former band members and coining in all the dosh for himself this time, or at least on. Um, I have no idea what the songwriting split is on those songs, but I'm sure he wouldn't be getting all of it by any means. But certainly on the recorded copyright of a new version of that material, then it would all go to Roger Waters. He wouldn't be having to share it with either living or dead members of the early Pink Floyd.
Yeah, interesting. The track "Too Many Two" and "Locomotive Breath," of course, they seem to be concerned with the idea of population growth. Um, is that something that still worries you? And do you consider yourself a Malthusian or follower of Thomas Malthus?
Not really, but I do feel inevitably that most of the problems we have on planet Earth are to do with there being, too many people after a finite number of resources, and that is everything from water through to the food in the ocean, on the land. The climate change is obviously very much directly associated with the growth of population, particularly in the Western world, the so-called civilized world. And that in itself is bringing about inevitably even more upheaval particularly in Africa, but in other parts of the world too, where it's going to be increasingly difficult to sustain the populations growing as they rapidly still are in Africa. So in sub-Saharan Africa, where generally speaking it is fertility rates are 4, 5, even higher in some cases. It is with the expandability of human life. It is with the fact that, well, we'll have lots of babies because they're not all going to survive anyway, and those that do will look after us when we're old. Well, sadly, that's probably not going to be the case because they're all going to bugger off across the Mediterranean to Europe, and that is part of the inevitability in the middle term, really. For the enormous shift of populations due to the pressures brought upon um, parts of the world that are unable to sustain themselves any longer. And that is something we're all going to have to cope with and find the economic and the moral resolution that is clearly at the moment so lacking. But you can't escape the fact that planet Earth would be a much happier place if there were only 2 or 3 billion of us, rather than what is rapidly moving towards 8 and possibly 9 billion during the next 50 years. So, I mean, it's a sobering thought is since I was born in 1947, the population of the world has increased. And I often ask people this question, how much do you think it's increased by? 10%, 20%, 50%? And people sort of, oh, I'm not sure really. Well, maybe 50%. I said, actually, it is slightly more than 3 times the population when I was born in just one lifetime.
Yeah.
Not quite one generation, but 2 generations. We've seen it population increase by well over 3 times now. Since I started saying that a few years ago. So it is a very sobering thought, or should be, the reality that we are living longer. We are not productive longer because people want to retire as soon as possible and be takers rather than givers to the world. And in the meantime, there is an accelerated ongoing birth rate in certain parts of the world, whilst the fertility rate in most European countries is now below the replacement level. If you don't factor in the enormous amount of immigration, which of course is increasing our populations in all of these countries. whether it's Italy or whether it's Poland or whether it's the UK or France or Germany. Our populations are increasing year on year, but it is mostly migration that is perhaps fulfilling the need of politicians and industrialists to grow the economy. Yeah. And growing the economy is this concept that no one seems to be able to shake. Why do we want to grow the economy? What to make more spin dryers, to make more motor cars, to make more refrigerators, to make more throwaway consumer goods? We seem to have the values really rather wrong in terms of priorities. But those are topics of some interest to write songs about, but I don't think you can write very directly about it because it sounds like you're preaching. So you have to choose your language to make it either a bit salty or to make it a little more intriguing and maybe a little more nebulous in order to quietly make a point without lecturing or hectoring. Yeah. So that's the tricky thing about being a songwriter, is how far do you go to say what you really mean? And to what degree do you backpedal and leave it to be read between the lines, perhaps?
Well, I think the analogy of the thundering locomotive is quite a good one, really, because it's something we don't seem to have any control over. And of course, solutions can take you, or the possible discussion of solutions can take you down some pretty dark avenues, I think. So it is. I think the idea of the locomotive metaphor is quite a good one.
Well, that's what it's about. Metaphors are tools of the trade. It's where would a songwriter be without tossing in a few good metaphors? Because it is a delight. I mean, I have no idea what it must be like to try and write songs in another language, but we are blessed with a very rich language, and for goodness sake, let's try and use it. Let's use this great asset that we have in the English language to try and be a little bit entertaining and at the same time be a bit clever with what we write. It gives me as a writer great satisfaction to use the tools of the writer's trade. And it should at least translate a little bit into what I think other people will appreciate on some level, even if it is not really necessarily deeply scrutinized, but it's just it's a feel of lyrics, a feel of words, a feel of music that imparts itself first of all. But at least there are other layers in the onion that you can gently unpeel and see what nastiness lies right in the middle. Stephen King is an author. He writes, as people would probably think of Stephen King, these rather gothic horror tales that have churned out 2 a year for all of his adult writing life. But when you read Stephen King, you realize that not only is he a prolific writer, not only is he one that can write popular and extremely popular fiction, but in almost every book that I've read of Stephen King's, there is a morality tale.
Yeah.
And he is talking about people. He's talking about innate goodness, badness, the complexities of it all, the dilemmas. He does actually really, really pose a lot of questions in the way that he writes. But it's all delivered in the context of popular fiction that people who get a thrill out of reading scary stuff or weird stuff will enjoy on that level. But behind it, every book contains 1, 2, or 3 morality tales of a sort, and that makes me doff my cap to Stephen King, perhaps more than any other writer.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would prefer reading the works of John le Carre, but he's no longer with us, and so I've read all of his books and enjoyed all of them. But in the absence of John le Carre, I'd rather turn to the enormous back catalogue of Stephen King to while away hours on aeroplanes or sitting in cars or vans or dressing rooms or wherever it might be. And it's worthwhile reading because it's a good. I mean, it just shows you that in the world of pop writing, you can have some pretty progressive and even heavy metal approach to being a novelist, and that's what Stephen King does. So I won't hear a bad word about Stephen King at all. He's an excellent writer.
Yeah. I've always said that I feel there's something essentially British about the way you write, and I've often mentioned you in the same breath as Ray Davis. Do you think I'm right at all in that?
Well, I think Ray Davis is that is for the most part a very is very much steeped in not just the Britishness, but the Britishness of a particular era and a particular geographical part, because he is a singer who, again, he combines observation with some degree of personal feeling that comes across. He sounds like he's very credible and has the authority to give you these vivid descriptions of London in the 60s and 70s. That I don't necessarily do that much of that sort of stuff. I mean, I've touched upon some elements of Britishness in terms of geography and setting a scene somewhere and being descriptive about it, like the song Mother Goose on the Aqualung album, or Baker Street Mews on whatever album that was, can't remember off the top of my head. But the again, it's hats off to Ray Davis for managing that genre in a way that directly communicates, because it's in the context of a good pop song. I mean, it wouldn't amuse or satisfy me to be, doing that in my repertoire at all. I would find it, just too pretty and too poppy. But then I'm a bit snobbish about music. I like something that's got a bit more musical grit to it. But lyrically and in terms of setting the mood and melodically, he has been a brilliant contributor to the annals of British pop music history. He's right up there with the very best of anybody, including the Beatles.
You started the tour with Reynard the Fox in the set list. Why did you decide to drop it?
I think because I felt, first of all, it was very much traditional English folk, and it wasn't something I was particularly feeling I was very able in terms of doing. Plus, it depended so much on vocal harmonies, and I think Dave Pegg was a particular favourite of his and Fairport Conventional, though in many ways the version done by Bob Fox and Stu Luckley was probably my favourite rendition ever of Reynard the Fox. But I have to say, partly I'm increasingly uncomfortable with the song, even to listen to it, simply because of the great, I suppose, the celebration of the kill of the fox, and it is, at the end of it is about celebrating the sport of fox hunting, which is something I, rather like other blood sports, I've just become increasingly disgruntled with, to put it mildly. There are times when you have to kill. If you're a meat eater, you are responsible for the killing of vast numbers of creatures, and that you can't shake that responsibility just because you're not the guy that slit the throat or hung it by the back legs. You are responsible for all that death. But if you're a consumer of meat products wandering the aisles of Tesco's or Sainsbury's, then you are not celebrating the kill. You are enjoying the taste of the food at the end of it, but you're not celebrating the act of killing. But that, in blood sports, is exactly what happens. And I do know that because I have been involved in that to a degree in my past, and that's what led me to stop, is watching the fact that people did celebrate the killing. It goes to its absolutely hideous extremes with the trophy hunting mentality of many people in many parts of the world, but Brits and Americans are pretty high on the list. It's the celebration of actually killing something for no good reason whatsoever. It is just about somehow trying to persuade yourself you're a real man or indeed a real woman because you go out there and shoot some creature that's been, presented to you as a legitimate target, and then you pose beaming, with your hunting rifle and some dead body next to you, and you do all these selfies and post them, and it is absolutely iniquitous and awful that people will celebrate something that I think is should be an act when it's strictly necessary, of almost reverence, and it's best conducted in solitude. So a lone hunter going out to shoot his dinner, I can present an argument for that.
Yeah.
But I can't present an argument for people going out simply trophy hunting for something that they're not going to eat. They're just going to cut the head off and try and have it shipped back to hang on their wall. I mean, it's that to me is immoral, is a disgrace in terms of an insult to the humanity that most of us would profess to hold dear.
So, how are we doing for time, Ian? Do you want I don't know if you've got another interview. Do you want to dash off and have your breakfast or something? Or
breakfast? that was almost 4 hours ago. No, I can manage a couple more. I'm sorry I waffle on so much, but you do present me with interesting questions, which quite often there is no simple answer.
Oh, right.
It always tends to be a bit convoluted, but then good questions deserve thoughtful answers.
Okay, well, the next
preferably thoughtful and short, but that's not my expertise.
No. Overhang, one of my favourite songs, which of course was released on the 20th anniversary box set, was that song inspired by touring with Dave Pegg?
Well, there's a few things that have been inspired by Dave Pegg. I mean, there's a song called "In the Grip of Stronger Stuff," at the point where Dave Pegg was no longer in the band, but he used to refer to being in the grip. In fact, it was in the grip of grappa, which was some alcoholic beverage that was widely touted in Germany as to be a cure for hangovers, but in fact it was just more of the same. But something that he would sometimes resort to drinking first thing in the morning to cure the hangover that he had from the night before. So in the grip of, and I didn't, I just in the grip of stronger stuff seemed like a somehow a useful title, but that was definitely that. I mean, David had his own song called, an instrumental piece called "The Swirling Pit," which he vividly described as being that phenomenon of the room spinning around you and you collapse into this vortex of overindulgence. And so yes, I mean, of course, to some extent you are fondly recalling certain elements, but I'm sure Dave would be the first to, or maybe the second or third, to admit that all of his escapades were not always harmless and pleasant. He could, as he well knows, having been chucked out of his own band several times, he did go too far, and he kind of knew it the next day because he couldn't remember what it is he'd done. And whenever you can't remember what it is you've done to upset people, then it must have been something pretty serious. And so it wasn't all fun and games, but the degree to which it was sort of lightly dealt with in terms of a couple of songs was something that seemed fair game, really.
One last question for you then, and it's a doozy. Pete Townsend said the counterculture was just youthful idealism and drug-fueled hope. Does he have a point, or is he just being a bit of a curmudgeon?
Well, I mean, again, those alternatives both apply. It's I think most of us have a bit of a curmudgeonly response to things that kind of irritated us at the time, and maybe with hindsight now seem even more the subject of derision or rejection. But I was never a hippie. I never adopted the hippie ideals of love and peace and, everybody going around with flowers in their hair. And, I mean, one of my all-time hates was a song called "If You're Going to San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Some Flowers in Your Hair," by a fellow called Scott McKenzie, who, as far as I know, really only had one hit. And I absolutely loathed this song. And I found myself on a television show in Germany once, and this guy was also on the bill, quite an elderly gent by then. And the producers said, oh, we want to ask a favor. Would you perform with Scott on his song? And I said, what? We want you to play on it. I said, well, there's no flute on it. Well, yeah, but invent something. I said, but and they said, well, Scott has asked us to ask you. He really, really, he's a big fan. He really wants you to play on his song. so I said, all right, give me half an hour. Try to work out some part to Scott McKenzie's song, and with a smile gaffer taped to my face, when I was, oh, Scott, so nice to meet you. I've always wanted to play on this song. And he was so happy that I played on his song, but it's just that it wasn't so much the song, it was the sentiment. It was this sort of rather trivial hippie ideal thing, and it was all about spinning money, just as it was for Malcolm McLaren some years later with the Sex Pistols and the whole punk thing. It was spinning money. It was all really amusing in parts, but it was it was very cynical, and I think that was the case with much of what happened in the hippie era. And I suppose the fact that we saw some people who were quite credible as angry young men, like John Lennon, suddenly became enraptured with the peace and love thing, which seemed to rather deflate, at least in part, of what we might have thought he was about. So it certainly got overdone, and Pete Townsend, let's not forget, Pete Townsend was a great proponent of I can't remember the name.
Ababa.
A self-serving guru who basically was
Mayor Baba.
Yeah, was
Mayor Baba.
Yeah, and my interviewer got the name straight away. Yeah, thanks. But it was it's that sort of a thing that I find it's difficult to shake off. That even people who were sucked into that world at the time and then perhaps later rejected it, they did in their own way perhaps help indoctrinate others into giving credibility to something that it may have grains of truth and wisdom in it, but not when it comes to the commercialization of those many gurus, and many of them in the new age are active today, making tons of money doing talks and seminars, and I watch a lot of that stuff because I'm very interested in what people have to preach in a spiritual sense, and I listen to them, even though it makes me cringe and occasionally want to pick up at least a small caliber weapon and point it in their direction. It makes me, it makes me quite angry sometimes, but I still want to give them the time of day. I still continue to listen to a lot of those YouTube videos of contemporary gurus, which is the word for them, and listen to what it is they have to say and try to give it a bit of credible space in my thinking, but I don't think I have one or two that I have a soft spot for. Eckhart Tolle is one that I rather like. He's my age, and he's a very droll, kind of weird, funny guy, and a lot of what he says, which is a big cobbled together mixture of various Eastern philosophies and religions. It is, I'm kind of 80%, I go along with what he has to say, but you can't escape the fact that he makes tons of money out of doing all of this, and through his foundation. And so, part of me is always, going to have that cynical view, thinking, well, it's all very well, but, maybe the more humble approach, which might be the approach of at least certain folks who eschewed personal wealth and eschewed the international fame. There are a few of them, but they're long gone. These days, it's all social media and of one sort or another, and the means to make pretty good money. I mean, I listened recently to somebody who makes no money at all, as far as I can be aware, but has views which I would, having listened, to extensively to what he's said, I would pretty much totally reject. But he's not one that seems to be in it for the money, even though his message is one that probably wouldn't earn him any anyway. But anyway, that's that. So yes, all these folks who have a bit of a cynical view in retrospect of the hippie era, then I can go along with it, because that's the way I felt at the time, and nothing has changed my mind since. It's love and peace is embedded in the essence of Christianity, but you can't forget the Spanish Inquisition, can you?
No, indeed. Interestingly, you mentioned gurus. I read somewhere that some of Timothy Leary's ashes were blasted into outer space, which seems rather appropriate, I think. I don't know if you'd read about that.
Well, there is quite a bit of my brother died recently, and he had a flirtation with Buddhism in later life, although I don't think when he died, he was strictly speaking a Buddhist, and the person who conducted the funeral was a humanist. And whether that was some choice he'd expressed, I don't really know. But he wanted his ashes scattered on the Isle of Iona, which has a long-standing spiritual place in British early Christianity, which seemed a little odd, because I can understand if he just wanted his ashes scattered from the top of a high mountain somewhere in central Scotland. I could have understood that, but the Isle of Iona, that seemed a bit of an odd one. Yeah. Given that he, as far as I know, was absolutely not a Christian, and so my nephew who is a sailor, is going to personally take the ashes and go to the Isle of Iona to toss them to the wind, hopefully while he's facing the right direction, and that's the choice. So I kind of go along with that, but I am not a I'm not a burn them up kind of guy. I'm a dig a hole guy. I want to be buried in a place that has some calm and peace and some spiritual reference for me. I think I'm probably specifically excluded from York Minster or Canterbury Cathedral, or indeed any of the cathedrals I played in. I would just settle for a nice deep hole in a quiet corner of a wood. Wow. I think all of these things have perhaps increasingly as you get older, you do have to face up to what is it that you want doing, and whether Timothy Leary expressed a desire to have his ashes somehow ejected from along with the poo, and whatever else is evacuated from the International Space Station or any other projectile in orbit or on a one-way trip. I have no idea, but I don't think that wouldn't be for me, personally speaking. And Timothy Leary is maybe directly responsible for, if there'd been no Timothy Leary, Peter Green might be a sane man performing live on stage today.
Sure.
The original singer of Pink Floyd might be in good shape and on tour at a theatre somewhere near you. So Timothy Leary and all of his promoting of something that turned out to be of course it would have happened anyway if it hadn't been him, but he was the guy at the center of all of that. And so along with the Grateful Dead, who seemed to directly foster that utilization of drugs which many people are not capable of dealing with. And I would say that's going to be a tough thing to have to live with, let alone tough thing to have to die with. Even if your ashes are floating around Saturn, it's still a tough thing to have to leave behind you as a legacy.
Yeah. Well, my father always said he wanted his ashes scattering on Margaret Thatcher's carpet, but that never happened. He was buried eventually.
Oh, well, there you go. in Margaret Thatcher's back garden, perhaps. I don't know.
Well, I think she went before him, actually. So.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, anyway, yes, it is a tricky one, and people often do have radical views about that, marking their own death. But perhaps death is the time when peace and love really do come to visit you in a very tangible way, well outside the context of hippie ideals. It is just about the recognition of having lived a life, and particularly in my case, having been very fortunate, and to be resting peacefully is a hackneyed phrase, but it'll do me fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I will close just by plugging the box set again, which will be available. It's available on vinyl as well. It's a nice vinyl box set, and this will come out on the 1st of September. As I said before, there are purchasing links just below this video. Ian, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, yes, on the almost eve of having to undertake for the first time in 3 years a US, not one but 3 US tours, then I am steeling myself for the inevitability of packing a suitcase and heading off into that great cultural divide. But once I get there, I shall be doing my best and trying to think of all the positive things I have to say about the USA, in spite of the fact that it's become increasingly an even more polarized country than it was last time I was there. So it's hard to even think about America without thinking about what's going to happen.
Donald Trump is on
a year from now,
again, isn't he?
Well, that looks like it, doesn't it? Anyway, nice to talk to you, and we will doubtless speak again one day in the future.
Thank you very much. You have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Bye.